Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into rabies, a disease that's both ancient and, well, still incredibly relevant globally.
Absolutely. It's definitely feared, and it's complex. Understanding it is just so crucial, especially when you look at prevention.
Exactly. We've got quite a bit of material here, a pretty comprehensive study guide, some focused excerpts. They cover everything from the basics, the virus itself, to how it actually, behaves inside the body.
And importantly, how we try to manage it, how we stop it.
Right. So our mission today is to sort of navigate through all this information for you, pull out the most important details.
Yeah, get to the core of it. What is rabies? How does this really cunning virus spread? Which animals carry it?
What's its journey inside the body look like? What are the signs?
And crucially, how do we diagnose it? And what do the sources tell us about prevention and control? We want to get you the essentials.
Perfect. So let's stick right there with the foundation. Based on these sources, how do we define rabies? What is it, really?
Okay, the sources are very consistent here. They define it as a severe, progressive, and almost invariably fatal viral encephalomyelitis.
Encephalomyelitis, so inflammation of the brain and spinal cord?
Exactly. A devastating infection caused by a virus. And it affects all warm-blooded animals, humans included.
And it's not just any brain virus, right? It's a specific family.
Precisely. It's what they call a neurotropic virus, meaning it targets nerve tissue specifically. It belongs to the genus Lysovirus.
Lysovirus.
Yeah. And the main one, the global player, is the rabies virus itself, RABV. But it's important, the sources do point out that other lysoviruses can cause basically the same disease. Clinically, you can't tell them apart.
That phrase, invariably fatal once signs appear, that's incredibly stark.
It really is. And you see it repeated in the material. It just highlights why prevention and, intervening before those signs appear is so absolutely critical.
Because once you see symptoms,
There's virtually no effective treatment. It's a grim reality.
and the sources really frame this as a major public health issue, especially globally.
Oh, absolutely. It's described as one of the oldest and certainly one of the most feared zoonotic diseases.
Zoonotic meaning it jumps from animals to humans.
Correct. And the scale is, well, it's sobering. Tens of thousands of human deaths every year worldwide. And the sources state over 95% of those are in Asia and Africa.
And that's primarily linked to dogs.
Yes, the material explicitly connects that huge burden to the persistence of canine rabies transmitted by dogs in those regions.
Okay, so knowing how deadly it is and that it comes from animals, how does it actually get transmitted? What's the main way?
The primary route, the way most exposures happen by far, is a bite from an infected animal.
Yeah.
The virus is there in high amounts in their saliva. When they bite, that saliva gets, inoculated directly into the wound.
But bites aren't the only way, right?
Right.
Even if they're the most common.
Correct. The sources do mention less common, non-bite routes. So think about infectious saliva contaminating a fresh scratch or an abrasion.
Like an open cut.
Exactly. Or if that saliva gets into contact with mucous membranes, eyes, nose, mouth, like a splash or a smear onto broken skin or your face.
I think I remember reading about some really, really rare exceptions, too.
Yes, definitely exceptions. Aerosol transmission, so breathing it in, has been recorded, but that's mainly in very specific high-risk settings. Think like certain bat caves with huge populations or maybe a lab accident.
Yep.
And tragically, human-to-human transmission via organ transplantation has happened. Exceedingly rare, but documented.
What about eating infected meat? Does that come up?
The sources touch on it, but clarify that while you could maybe imagine it happening, ingestion just isn't considered a significant way it spreads in the real world.
Okay, that makes sense. So mostly bites, sometimes contamination of wounds or mucous membranes, and those other routes are really outliers.
Got it. Now, who are the main carriers? Which animals should we be aware of?
Well, the first thing is all mammals can get it. They're all susceptible.
Right. But certain species are the key reservoirs and vectors. They maintain the virus in nature and are most likely to pass it on. Globally, especially where human cases are highest, domestic dogs are the #1 reservoir.
Dogs. Okay.
Cats are also very susceptible and can transmit it quite effectively. Other domestic animals, cattle, horses, sheep, they can get rabies, but they're often described as dead-end hosts.
Meaning they get sick, but they don't really spread it further.
Exactly that. The virus might not reach high levels in their saliva, or maybe their behavior changes in ways that don't facilitate transmission. And then, of course, there's wildlife, a huge factor.
Like what kind of wildlife?
Wildlife carnivores are critical reservoirs. Often, they maintain distinct genetic variants of the virus specific to their region. So, foxes in Europe, raccoons and skunks in North America, coyotes, mongooses elsewhere. It varies.
And bats. They seem to come up a lot.
Yes, bats are increasingly recognized as really important reservoirs globally, and sometimes bat bites can be so small they go unnoticed, which complicates things.
What about the smaller animals people often encounter, like squirrels or rabbits? Any risk there?
Generally, the sources are reassuring on that front. Rodents, squirrels, mice, rats, and legomorphs, which includes rabbits and hares, these seem quite resistant to rabies.
Oh, yeah.
They're very rarely involved in passing it to humans. The exception might be a really weird situation, like an unprovoked attack from one showing obviously abnormal behavior, but generally low risk.
And where in the world is rabies found? Is it everywhere?
It's endemic, meaning constantly present in over 150 countries. As we said, Asia and Africa bear the brunt of human cases.
But some places are rabies-free.
Yes, that's an important point the sources make. Places like Australia, though, they have their own related. Bat lessivirus in Antarctica are free. Also New Zealand, Hawaii, Japan, Iceland, parts of Scandinavia.
So it sounds like many developed countries have managed dog rabies, but wildlife rabies is still a problem.
That's a key distinction, yes. Successful mass vaccination of dogs has largely eliminated that threat in many developed nations. But the challenge shifts then to managing these wildlife reservoirs. The fight looks different depending on where you are.
Okay, this next part is, well, it's fascinating, but also a bit unnerving. The virus's journey inside the body. How does that work?
It's remarkable, really, how efficient and targeted it is. So after the bite, it usually enters muscle tissue first. The sources suggest maybe some initial replication there, but that's not the main event.
Where does it go then?
Its target is the nervous system. It binds to specific receptors on the peripheral nerve endings near the wound site, things like nicotinic acetylcholine receptors.
The one involved in muscle control.
Exactly. That's its doorway into the nerve network.
And it doesn't just drift. It actively moves along the nerve.
Precisely. This is a critical point from the material. The virus travels fast along the nerve fiber, heading towards the spinal cord and brain. It uses something called retrograde axonal transport.
Retrograde. So
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah, basically it hijacks the nerve's own internal highway system that normally moves stuff back towards the nerve cell body. And the speed and distance of this journey directly influence the incubation period.
Ah, so a bite on the face might lead to symptoms faster than a bite on the foot.
Generally, yes. Closer to the brain, or in an area with lots of nerve endings, means a potentially shorter incubation period.
And once it hits the brain, what happens?
That's where it really takes hold. The virus replicates extensively, especially within neurons. This causes widespread dysfunction, inflammation. That's the encephalomyelitis we mentioned.
Does it kill the brain cells directly?
Interestingly, the sources note it's generally considered non-cytolytic in neurons, at least initially, meaning it disrupts their function, messes up the wiring, rather than outright destroying them immediately.
And there's that classic thing they look for under the microscope. Nigri bodies.
Yes, that's a hallmark diagnostic feature. These are characteristic clumps of viral material called Nigri bodies found inside infected neurons, often in specific areas like the hippocampus or the Purkinje cells in the cerebellum.
Are they always there?
No, and that's key. They are considered pathognomonic, meaning if you see them, it is rabies. But the sources caution they aren't always present, so not seeing them doesn't rule rabies out.
Okay, so it replicates in the brain, causes chaos there. Then what? Does it stay there?
No, it then spreads outwards again. It's called centrifugal spread, moving away from the center. It travels back out along nerves from the brain and spinal cord to other tissues.
Like where?
Critically, it has a strong preference for the salivary glands.
Ah, the salivary glands. Back to transmission.
Exactly. The virus replicates like crazy there and gets shed into the saliva in high concentrations. And here's the really insidious part, the sources stress. This shedding often starts a few days before the animal shows any obvious signs of being sick.
Wow, so an animal can look healthy, but already be infectious.
Precisely. It can be shedding virus for, say, up to 3 days or so before the classic symptoms appear, and it stays infectious until it dies, usually quite soon after signs start.
That really explains why you have to be so careful with potential exposures, even from seemingly okay animals. Okay, let's talk about those signs. What does rabies actually look like when symptoms emerge? You said it's variable.
Hugely variable. And the incubation period itself can range from just days to months, occasionally even years, though usually it's in the weeks to few months ballpark. When signs do start, the sources often describe a progression through stages, but an animal might not show all of them clearly.
It's the first stage, the prodromal one.
That's the initial phase. It can be subtle, maybe last 1 to 3 days. Behavior changes are often the first clue. A friendly dog might become irritable or shy. A timid cat might suddenly seem bold or restless.
Any physical signs?
They might lick or chew intensely at the bite site. You might also see non-specific things like a mild fever. Maybe they go off their food, seem lethargic. Pupils might dilate, just not quite right.
Then comes the one people picture, right? The mad dog phase, the furious form.
Yes, that's often the next stage. The furious phase lasts maybe 2 to 7 days. This is where you see extreme irritability, aggression, unprovoked attacks, biting at things that aren't there, restlessness, wandering, disorientation.
What about the physical signs then?
Their voice might change, become hoarse, that's nerve damage affecting the larynx. And the classic hypersalivation, the foaming, often happens because they physically can't swallow properly.
And the fear of water, hydrophobia.
It's less a fear and more that attempting to drink or even bright lights, photophobia, triggers incredibly painful muscle spasms in the throat. So they avoid it. Seizures, tremors, progressive paralysis can also start here. The sources note cats often show this furious form. One said maybe 90% of cat cases.
Okay, and the other main presentation is the paralytic or dumb form.
Right. This typically lasts 2 to 10 days. The dominant feature here is progressive paralysis. It often starts in the hind limbs and moves forward. Swallowing becomes extremely difficult dysphagia, leading to that drooling and saliva pooling because they just can't get it down. People might think the animal is choking.
Any other signs?
The voice often goes completely due to laryngeal paralysis. They become increasingly withdrawn, apathetic, depressed, and eventually fall into a coma. Sources mention cattle often show this paralytic form more commonly.
So the presentation can really differ. And you mentioned atypical signs too.
Yeah, that's a really important point for diagnosis. Rabies can look like a lot of other things. Sometimes the main sign might be something less obvious, like sudden lameness or incoordination, ataxia, or even GI issues. It makes just looking at the animal very challenging for diagnosis.
And the outcome, regardless of the form, once signs appear.
Well, it's what the sources keep repeating. Invariably fatal. Death usually follows within 10 days of the first clinical signs, often much quicker. One source mentioned just 3 to 4 days for dogs and cats once they're clearly symptomatic.
Okay, given how varied the signs are and how quickly it progresses, how is rabies actually diagnosed for sure? Diagnosing a live animal sounds really difficult.
It is. The sources really emphasize that. Confirming rabies just based on clinical signs in a living animal is very unreliable. Diagnosis usually starts with strong suspicion, especially if it's an unvaccinated animal with neurological signs or there's a known exposure risk. But definitive confirmation, that's almost always done post-mortem, after death.
What do they need for that test?
The gold standard sample is fresh brain tissue. Specifically, they need parts of the brainstem and the cerebellum. Ideally, the whole head is submitted, kept chilled, importantly, not frozen to a diagnostic lab.
And what tests do they run on the brain?
The main one, the most reliable and widely used, according to the sources, is the direct fluorescent antibody test, DFA.
DFA.
It's relatively fast and detects rabies virus antigens, parts of the virus, directly in the brain tissue. That's the standard confirmation test.
Are there other tests mentioned?
Yes, a few others. RT-PCR, which detects the virus's genetic material, its RNA. That can be useful if the brain tissue is decomposed or for figuring out the specific strain or variant of the virus. Histopathology, looking for those Negri bodies we talked about, is supportive if they're found, but again, not conclusive on its own since they aren't always there. And virus isolation, actually growing the virus, is possible, but it takes time and isn't routine for diagnosis.
Sounds like ruling out other possibilities is crucial given how varied the science can be.
Absolutely critical. The sources list a whole range of differential diagnoses. You have to consider other infections causing encephalitis, poisonings, head trauma, metabolic diseases, brain tumors, you name it.
So the takeaway is extreme caution.
Yes. Any unvaccinated animal showing neurological signs should be handled with extreme care, treated as a potential rabies suspect until proven otherwise. It's a vital safety measure.
And what about that 10-day observation period for a dog or cat that bites someone? How does that fit in?
Yes, that's a key public health protocol. If a healthy-appearing domestic dog or cat bites a person, the standard recommendation is to confine and observe that animal for 10 days.
Why 10 days specifically?
The rationale, right from the sources, is based on that shedding period we discussed. If the animal stays healthy for those 10 days, shows no signs of rabies, it could not have been shedding infectious virus in its saliva at the time of the bite. Remember, shedding only happens for maybe 3 days before signs start, so 10 days of health clears it.
Got it. That makes sense. Now, the really tough question. If an animal does develop signs consistent with rabies, is there any treatment, any hope?
Sadly, no. The sources are absolutely clear and unanimous on this. Once clinical signs of rabies appear, there is no effective treatment. It is, as we've said, invariably fatal.
So what's the recommendation then?
From both an animal welfare perspective, because the disease involves intense suffering, and for public health safety, euthanasia is the recommended action for confirmed or highly suspected clinical cases.
Okay. What about an animal that hasn't shown signs yet, but was exposed? Say, bitten by a known rabid animal.
Right, post-exposure management. That depends heavily on the animal's vaccination status and, importantly, local regulations. They can vary.
Let's take the best case scenario first.
Sure.
The exposed animal is currently vaccinated.
Okay, according to protocols like the one described for the U.S., a currently vaccinated animal that's exposed should get an immediate rabies booster vaccine right away. And then it needs to be confined and observed by the owner for 45 days.
45 days, okay. And if the exposed animal is unvaccinated?
The primary public health recommendation to completely eliminate any risk is euthanasia.
That sounds harsh, but I guess it removes the possibility of it developing rabies later.
Exactly. However, the sources do acknowledge an alternative if the owner is strongly against euthanasia. That involves a very strict isolation period, usually 4 to 6 months, at an approved facility.
Strict meaning?
Absolutely no contact with people or other animals during that time. They typically get vaccinated either on entry to isolation or just before release. But the sources stress this is costly, difficult, and still carries some residual risk compared to euthanasia.
What if an animal's vaccination is overdue? Like they had shots but missed their booster?
That's kind of a gray area, as the sources point out. How it's handled really depends on local public health rules. Sometimes they might be treated as unvaccinated, requiring that long isolation or euthanasia. Other times, if the lapse wasn't too long, maybe a shorter observation period, like the 45 days, might be allowed after a booster. You absolutely have to check the local regulations.
Okay, now let's shift to humans. If a person gets bitten, what's the key intervention?
For humans, the lifesaver is prompt post-exposure prophylaxis, PP. It's incredibly effective, but only is given quickly after the exposure.
What does PP involve?
The very first step, highlighted as critical, is thorough wound washing. Immediately scrubbing the bite wound with soap and water for a good 15 minutes. It sounds simple, but it can significantly reduce the amount of virus at the site.
15 minutes, okay. What comes after washing?
Then comes the medical part of TP. It usually has 2 components. First, rabies immune globulin rig. This provides immediate, ready-made antibodies. Ideally, as much of the dose as possible is injected directly into and around the wound itself.
So passive immunity right away.
Exactly, while your body gears up. The second part is a series of rabies vaccine doses, given over several weeks. This stimulates your own immune system to produce long-lasting active immunity.
Who decides if someone needs PPP?
A medical professional. They'll assess the risk based on the type of exposure the animal involved. Was it a stray, provoked, acting normally, and the rabies situation in that specific area.
And I think you mentioned something for people at high risk before they get exposed.
Yes, pre-exposure prophylaxis, or pre-P. This is basically vaccinating people before any exposure happens. It's recommended for those with high occupational risk vets, animal control officers, lab workers dealing with the virus, or sometimes travelers going to high-risk areas for extended periods.
What does pre-P do?
It provides a baseline level of immunity. So if someone who's had pre-EP is later exposed, the PP they need is usually simpler, often just a couple of vaccine boosters, and they typically don't need the rig injection.
It really sounds like prevention is the absolute key with rabies. For animals, for people.
It is. That's the overwhelming message.
So what are the big picture strategies for stopping the spread, according to these sources?
The absolute cornerstone, the most effective and cost-efficient strategy globally is mass vaccination of domestic animals, especially dogs.
Why dogs specifically?
Because, as we said, in large parts of the world where human rabies is common, dogs are the primary source of infection for people. Achieving high vaccination coverage in the dog population, like 70% or more, creates herd immunity. It breaks the cycle of transmission to humans. Many places have mandatory dog vaccination laws because of this.
What about the wildlife reservoirs? Can we vaccinate them?
Yes, and that's a key strategy, particularly where wildlife rabies is the main issue, like in North America or parts of Europe. They use oral rabies vaccination, ORV.
How does that work?
They distribute baits, maybe fishmeal blocks or something attractive to the target species that contain the rabies vaccine inside. Wildlife, like foxes or raccoons, eat the baits and get vaccinated. The sources say these ORV programs have been successful in reducing or even eliminating rabies in certain wildlife populations in specific areas. And alongside vaccination, there are other crucial animal control measures. Responsible pet ownership is huge. Licensing pets, having clear identification. Controlling stray and feral animal populations is vital. Leash laws, keeping pets confined. And really important, strict quarantine rules for animals being imported from areas where rabies is common.
Public awareness must play a big role, too.
Absolutely critical. People need to understand how rabies spreads, why vaccinating their pets is non-negotiable, why they should avoid handling wildlife, especially animals acting strangely.
And what to do if they are bitten.
Yes. Knowing about immediate wound washing and seeking prompt medical advice for PP is essential. Education is a massive layer of prevention.
The sources seem to wrap all this up under the idea of One Health. What does that mean here?
It's a really important concept for diseases like rabies. One Health recognizes that human health, animal health, and the health of the environment are all interconnected. You can't effectively tackle a zoonotic disease like rabies by just focusing on humans or just on animals.
So it requires collaboration.
Exactly. Integrating efforts between human public health agencies and animal health authorities for surveillance tracking the disease in both populations, for control efforts that might cross borders because animals don't respect borders, and for ongoing research. You have to address the animal reservoir to protect people.
One last practical point. If an area gets contaminated, say with saliva, is the virus hard to kill?
Fortunately, no. The sources indicate the rabies virus is actually quite fragile outside of a living host. It doesn't survive long in the environment and is easily inactivated by common disinfectants.
Like bleach.
Yep, even a simple 1.32 dilution of regular household bleach is effective for disinfecting surfaces. Sunlight also helps break it down.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground from how the virus sneaks into nerves to the awful progression of the disease, and finally to how we fight back through vaccination and public health measures. It's quite a story.
It really is. A disease that evokes this primal fear, but one where we actually have very effective tools, especially for prevention.
So, summarizing the key takeaways. Rabies is incredibly deadly once symptoms start, but it's almost entirely preventable.
Right. And the single biggest weapon globally is vaccinating dogs. For people, prompt PP after exposure is life-saving.
And tackling it effectively requires that One Health approach, human and animal health working together.
Absolutely.
So, reflecting on all this for you, our listeners, we've heard how targeted efforts like mass dog vaccination have been remarkably successful in pushing back rabies in many developed nations. But the challenge of wildlife reservoirs, different animals carrying different strains across borders, remains significant.
Yeah, it really does. Which leads to a final thought to consider. Given that success against canine rabies in some places, but the persistent complex battle against diverse wildlife reservoirs worldwide, what might the next phase of the global strategy look like? Could it involve an even more ambitious, coordinated One Health effort, one that really tries to balance those proven domestic animal controls with the much trickier task of managing rabies in wild populations across all sorts of different environments and political landscapes, aiming for true global eradication?
That's a huge question, something to definitely think about as we navigate this shared planet with all its creatures.